An unfortunate long-term consequence of gacha games is the inevitable oversaturation of its roster. Being a genre known for releasing new characters in an ever-expanding pool, combined with the absence of balance updates like we see in other games, what ends up happening is eventually there will be a sizable advancement in either power or capacity between generations of units that ultimately render the old guard obsolete. It's understandable why they go down this path. The primary source of revenue sustained by most gachas is new content, the fancy new toy with the fancy new gimmick that helps you take on the fancy new boss. Financially, they have a clear motive to keep releasing new stuff no matter how much old stuff there is, or no matter how necessary it might be. And as I always like to say, for them to incentivize players to actually go after these new characters, said characters have to present a new mechanic or gameplay element that the player base at large has had either limited or no access to at that point, or they have to perform current tasks at a greater level of efficiency, hence the two terms feature creep and power creep. After enough time, there becomes a noticeable difference between the new characters and the old, prompting players to, from a practical point of view, discontinue usage of the latter category either for the sake of necessity or to account for opportunity cost. Genshin's different though. Unlike the majority of gachas where players by and large view characters as nothing more than a means to an end, sentimental value and personal attachment towards characters run deep within the community. Questionably so, players are extremely loyal to their respective favorites even if in relativity they rank among the lower tiers of the meta, though with Fontaine having given us our biggest leap in power yet, that divide between the old and the new is getting more conspicuous with every version. Leading us to this video, I wanted to have a discussion over the uncertain future of old characters and the difficult challenge facing Hoyo in regards to how they can continue releasing new content while preserving the current stuff we already have. Genshin Impact has fundamentally reinvented the gacha genre in ways formerly never attempted, from exclusively mobile titles to the rather simple gameplay formula to something as complex and comprehensive in scope and experience as AAA big box titles. This game has single-handedly elevated the standards and expectations of gacha games, with companies including more voice acting, higher quality artwork and animations, and even expanding more on their marketing and branding to emulate the scale of Genshin. Gachas are no longer a niche category of gaming like they were in the 2010s, they've officially entered the mainstream. While Hoyo has deviated off the beaten path with its flagship title, Genshin still adheres to the general idea of gachas, namely in that it continuously releases new content and thus new characters to go along with it, but unlike other games whose new characters and classes are freely obtainable, gachas institute a price tag onto every edition, making players have to consider the cost of acquiring them, which can either be the time or money conducive to including them in their roster. In other words, even though Genshin maintains a difficulty ceiling low enough to accommodate a wide selection of characters, they're still forced to play into the notion of new cast members being, in some way, shape, or form, better or more enticing than what players currently have right now. With them finally making an effort to produce new endgame content in recent times, as evident by the new Imaginarium Theater game mode, time will tell if that pressure grows. All the same, though Genshin is a gacha title, it tries its best to stand out as something more, and one way they do that is via characters. Longtime gacha players can all agree that the rate of new characters being released is considerably slower than most other gachas, who frequently pump out upwards of half a dozen new additions per month. That's because Hoyo tries to do more than just make new units for the sake of making them. Every character in Genshin Impact has a story, a background, some kind of personal involvement within the greater mythos of Teyvat. More than just their gameplay and place in the meta, these units have a presence in the world, a personality, a voice actor, an identity. Every member of the cast, with the exception of this one random person, is connected with others, which is what gives the game more substance than other gachas where characters just exist to be chosen for battle. Essentially, Genshin makes it personal by putting a lot of effort into every character, hence why players are so attached to their favorite units. They have the same level of detail and attention as anime characters, and you know how much us weebs love our waifus and husbandos. Be that as it may, this is still a video game, not a visual novel. While the game tries its best to give equal attention to everyone, they're ultimately a for-profit company. It makes more financial sense to release new characters over giving attention to older ones. We're almost 4 years into the game, and for better or worse, many of the old units have been fighting against the test of time for a long while now. Remarkably, multiple version 1 units have managed to stay relevant and even dominant this entire time. Characters like Child, Xingqiu, Shanling, Bennett, Zhongli, and Fischl are still prize picks to this day, despite not having received any particular direct upgrade, aside from maybe Fischl Adentro, but she was already one of the best 4-stars in the game. Additionally, though gachas are not exactly known for giving much attention to old characters buying universal systems, several of them have gotten indirectly buffed with the inclusion of new characters either offering a new playstyle to them or compensating for their inherent flaws. Thanks to Farzan and Xianyun, Shell has experienced a second lease on life, being one of the most effective teams in the game to this day. Another member of the Liyue trio, Hu Tao, has repeatedly found ways to prevent herself from falling off through both new units and universal systems. Diluc has become decently strong with the advent of Xianyun, providing his massive base damage on plunging attacks they use as well. On the support side of things, Jean went from a niche if not average healing support to one of the best in the game courtesy of the Hydro Archon's unique interactions with health manipulation, finally necessitating the acting Grandmaster's team-wide healing. I'm saying all this because I don't want to imply that all of the old units are facing the same situation, and it's also to highlight one of the ways in which Hoyo can remedy that very situation. It's true that compared to other gachas, Genshin has done a much better job maintaining the relevance of its older characters, and based on what version 4 has proven, they're making a concerted effort to allow as much of the early generations on board as the game continues to advance in power and feature creep. The sad part is they can't allow all of them. Many of Genshin's old units have been hemorrhaging market share, going from high-value targets to almost entirely non-existent among top or even high-performing teams. It's kinda nostalgic to think about. Back in the day, units like Mona and Eula were some of the best in the game by virtue of their staggering damage output, especially in the realm of single-instance attacks. This was during a time when landing 400-500 Ks was considered an achievement, but nowadays you see people doing that on the regular. It's not quite as impressive as it used to be. Granted, much of what made them so popular back then was that there was no one else but them. It's easy to believe Mona placed among the top of her class when all she had to contend against was Barbara, Xingqiu, and Child, and bear in mind, this was before Child International gained headway and Barbara found niche use with the Nilou teams. Looking at the present day when we have units like Nilou, Kokomi, Furina, Neuvillette, and Yelan, Mona's position within the Hydro cast looks a lot more modest. Circumstantially, things have also been spiraling for her. Cryo hasn't been doing all that well since version 3, and being an exclusively freeze-oriented support, by extension that makes Mona not do so well either. It's debatable whether she's even used for Vaporize anymore, what with there being so many better facilitators of that kind of playstyle. Similarly, Eula was also once the belle of the ball. When she came out at 1.5, she was a very strong contender relative to the cast, but once again, there was hardly much competition to begin with. Xiao, Ganyu, Hu Tao, Child, Keqing, and Diluc, none of which had their perfected teams at that point in time. Again though, circumstantially, the physical niche has received virtually no concrete improvements to their cast pretty much since then, causing Eula to fall off in value greatly over time despite still technically being the strongest physical damage dealer in the game. While several elements have that one character who can facilitate a hypercarry team, Shunho for Cryo, Vars for Anima, Kujosada for Electro, and Godo for Geo, the physical element doesn't really have anyone like that, only a few token buffers here and there like Rosaria and Mika. So Eula has been more or less mooching off of universal buffs like Raiden Shogun's Elemental Burst Enhancement or Furina's Damage Amp. There are other Day 1 units who may have never really been the best but were serviceable to some extent, certainly enough to make them worth pulling for. These days, however, you'd be hard pressed to find any reason to use them at all. One of the most forgotten characters in Genshin would have to be Albedo. Albedo was always marketed as a jack of all trades, master of none support, having a bit of everything across the board and dealing a fair bit of damage himself. He found gainful employment as a third Geo character for Ito and Godo, supplementing both of them with extra energy and meeting the third Geo party requirement. Outside of that, there were a few niche interactions with them running alongside Zhongli and Hu Tao teams, purely for lack of any alternative, or C4 Albedo running with Shell, but in almost every team where he was usable or okay in, he's been effectively replaced by someone else. Hu Tao discarded him the instant Kazuha came out, Shell threw him away for Farzan, and even within Mono Geo teams, Chiodi is considered a more DPS-oriented quickswapper for that team. The main reason you used Albedo in Mono Geo was because he was the only viable third Geo character, but now there's someone with a more focused role than him. Albedo was always an okay choice, not the best one, but with every possible team he could fit into gaining more efficient slots, opportunity cost has kicked him out of every situation he could potentially be used in. Klee's another example of a character who was by all accounts a respectably serviceable unit despite her rather clunky playstyle. Though it wasn't very high profile, she had pretty good success with Mono Pyro throughout versions 2 and 3 if you chose to go that route. The main problem is that Xiangling, Bennett, and Kazuha were high demand units who could be put to better use in other teams, which is why not many people talked about Mono Pyro Klee even though it was actually fine. When Linny came out though, she was completely superseded, executing on Mono Pyro far stronger and more comfortably. Now, Klee's surprisingly high Pyro application made her a potential candidate for forward Vaporize teams with Furina, but we're running into the same issue again where Furina and by extension the supports to pair with her can apply to many characters. I'm pretty sure even Gaming can rival Klee with enough investment, although they are technically in different niches. I'm aware that the likes of Linny, Hu Tao, Gaming and such don't directly compete with Klee because Klee's more of a half carry, half team support kind of character who likes to enable her team, very similar to I guess like Child. Even so, she was still affected somewhat negatively from the resurgence of Pyro in version 4. By no means are the list of old characters endemic to just 5 stars. 4 stars are troubled by this even more, with characters like Chongyun, Ningguang, Yanfei, Racer, and so on having basically zero presence in the meta as we know it. It's a strange turn of events. For some old characters, the addition of new units and systems turned out to be a blessing for them, giving characters like Diluc, Jean, Noelle, Shao, Keqing, and Hu Tao a second or even a third lease on life. Meanwhile, for other old characters, the addition of new units and systems was the final nail on the coffin, taking away what little semblance of opportunity cost characters like Eula, Albedo, Klee, and Mona had. I do want to clarify that in terms of strength, I'm not saying these 4 are the same. Klee especially is still very strong if you can put up with their gameplay, it's just that in regards to their situations, they're in the same boat. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, power and feature creep were guaranteed to happen. It's an eventual and inevitable outcome for games that periodically release new characters. For other gachas, players are fine with this because characters are just a means to an end, but for Genshin, the thought of units becoming lost to time is much more serious. Hoyo is aware of this. They know that every unit has a loyal fanbase, no matter how small, and so they have to accommodate for that by giving all of them at least some attention. People have been getting frustrated by units like Kaveh not having gotten a rerun. Realistically, there's no benefit to giving him a rerun due to how weak he is, but they have to because of what Genshin represents to its players. Furthermore, they have to ensure that every character, no matter how old or how niche, still has a place where they're either best in slot or good enough to contend with everyone else. The moment a character no longer has something to be part of, they become forgotten and neglected, which is bad for a game built upon fostering attachment from character to character and character to player. This will only become more and more difficult to maintain over time, unless they decide to give us a 4-party Spiral Abyss or something ridiculous like that. Trying to give every character just enough opportunity cost value becomes impossible at a certain point. But we're not there yet, which brings me to the final topic. How can we give these characters more value again? While not ideal, the most applicable solution would be forced necessity. Forced necessity is a practice of contriving a scenario that explicitly demands a character with a specific playstyle. For example, over in the Game Blue archive, there was a unit named Shizuko who, all things considered, was really freaking garbage. She was a bad support unit all around. However, for a while at least, Shizuko is actually obligatory for you to perfectly clear one of the raid bosses, Shirokuro, thanks to her ability to summon a cover, Blue Archive's version of a geoconstruct essentially, that completely shut down one of the boss's main mechanics. I quit Blue Archive back in spring of 2023, so she likely got officially power crept, but that's an example of what Hoyo can do for Genshin to try and bring some of these units back to relevance. Honkai Star's already been doing something similar with all of its different game modes and different cycle blessings, necessitating you to have a wide variety of units geared up to handle all the various combat scenarios you come across. Without, say, pure fiction, Herta and Himiko likely would have been lost to time. Something they could do to make Albedo valuable, for instance, is to create a boss who generates massive earthquakes that deal huge damage, which can only be avoided by being airborne. So Venti's elemental skill letting you hover in the air, or Wander's levitation, or Albedo's elevator thingy propping you up above the ground can be counters for that. They can obviously make you look stronger by creating a boss that negates all elemental damage, forcing you to rely on physical attacks to take them out. These hyper-specific scenarios can artificially inflate a character's usability by targeting mechanics that only they and maybe a few other units have. Of course, that approach in and of itself has a few drawbacks. New players or free-to-plays who don't have that many characters will find these contrived mechanics extremely unfair and predatory, pressuring them to pull for specific characters that they don't even enjoy playing or using just to enable them to clear this one thing. So if they want to go down this route, they'll have to create free-to-play solutions. Again, that's one option they can take. In addition, they can always try to go the indirect buff approach by, say, making freeze relevant again for Mona, giving actual physical support for Eula, or finding some random way to make Pyro Catalyst users overpowered. But if and when Genshin's roster reaches triple digits, that becomes untenable as there are too many units to account for while simultaneously pushing the ceiling on a unit's capability. All that's to say, I'm morbidly curious as to what will happen come version 5 and later version 6. I've always championed the notion that no character is unusable, that you could clear all the game's content with even the quote-unquote bottom tier units. But I also emphatically stress the idea of opportunity cost. Even if a character is viable, if there's so many stronger, faster, cheaper, efficient, or versatile options out there, at a certain point, bias aside, there's zero reason for a player to want to use the 4th, 5th, or 6th best option. In other gachas, no one really cares if a mid or low tier character gets lost to time. If they're not useful, they're not useful, simple as that. But Genshin's different. Hoyo cannot abandon anyone no matter how weak they are. If they do, players will become disillusioned. They have to give everyone reruns, they have to give everyone some kind of attention because that's the kind of game Genshin is. It's all about the characters. If they abandon them, that will actively damage the reputation of the game. What do you guys think? Do you believe there's a solution to keeping all existing units relevant while releasing new characters? I implore you to share it in the comments. For now, if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be very much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.